All right, everybody, welcome back. Happy to welcome back friend of the show, Bruce Mehlman, prolific speaker, lobbyist. He has the Bruce Mehlman's Age of Disruption Substack newsletter, and friend of the show. I think I said that already, but Bruce, good to see you, man.
Great to see you as well, Matt. Always fun to be back on your podcast.
Well, look, every once in a while, I just got to check in with Bruce Mehlman and get a lay of the land. So we're going to cover a lot of ground here, but let's just start broad. We're about 30 days or so out from the presidential election. I don't know when this episode is going to run, but something like that. Where are we? How's it looking?
It's a coin flip, that we're going to have a photo finish. And that rather than you and I visiting at the end of the week of November 4th to decide what happened and what it means, we may have a podcast together a week after that and decide where are we and what comes next.
We very well may. This is probably, maybe we could touch on this. I'm of the opinion that this closely divided country is not necessarily great. In the sense that there's never like a mandate. Whoever loses thinks they're going to win next time. So why cooperate with why negotiate? Why compromise? And it feels like we've kind of been in this cycle since 1996. I mean, I guess Obama in 2008 may be the one exception, but yet another election that's going to probably be close. And whoever loses will, even if they accept the loss, we'll get them next time and probably in the midterms.
Yeah, look, I mean, you're right. 08 was a thumping. I'd argue 04 was a clear and decisive win. The last time the Republicans won the popular vote majority,
but narrowly.
12 felt tight till the very, very, very end. But we knew the answer by the time we went to bed. Things obviously got super squirrely thereafter. But you and I were chatting before this began about my next report, which I do quarterly, and you've always been nice enough to invite me to talk about them. And then I've now got the weekly Substack thing going, which is taking some time away from the quarterly. But the big idea for the quarterly that I wish if I could just find some focused time that I want to write about right now is called the 9-week slog. And it looks at November 6th through January 20th, because I think we're in for, we already have seen a historic amount of litigation. What used to be pretty routine. I mean, most election administration officials are retirees, are little old ladies with blue hair who take the job wonderfully seriously, who want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to vote, who make sure there aren't, a bunch of corrupt goons who walk in, but who aren't part of any partisan army, who are doing their little jobs, and God bless them for it. That's the real arsenal of democracy in my mind. But those guys now are facing threats, and so that we may have a risk of violence up to and on election day. There will be potentially a lot of contested state level dispute about whether rules were or were not followed and who the right electors are. I mean, I'm really worried about the 9 weeks that follow election day.
Yeah, a few thoughts there, Bruce. One is Donald Trump's investing a lot in ballot integrity as opposed to get out the vote. So there's going to be lots of litigation, or at least the potential for that. I think it's a good idea possibly to start drafting poll workers, to these little old ladies, to start drafting other people, just like you get jury summons. You get summons to do jury duty. You get summons to work on election day. And I think we might want to also consider limiting the amount of time between election day and inauguration. I mean, I realize it used to be much longer in the olden days when it took you a long time to travel to Washington, D.C., but I feel like there's more time for mischief, and maybe we need to somehow close the gap. Those are big reforms, but it's a problem.
Yeah, although you're right, unless if it takes a while to count, and then if it's tight, like so many states have been in the recent memory, then recount. You may not actually have all of this, wasted filler time. It's Georgia. There's an effort to now not use machines. I don't know if the longshoremen have become in charge of the Georgia election effort, but if you're going to have millions of votes and even on election day say we should hand count them all, it's going to take you weeks to have any certainty as to who won. Then you're going to want to recount. I tend to think that machines are more reliable for things like, when you go into the bank, they use a machine to count out, if you say, give me $101 bills, they put it in the machine to count it, and they do it twice to make sure they got it right. And in theory, you could, well, I don't trust that, but actually the machine's going to get it right more often than the human. And I would imagine with millions of election day ballots, it's true then too. So we are in a fraught time. I'm with you. I don't want, idle hands are the devil's workshop.
Yeah.
I don't want to waste time, but it feels like there may not be a lot of wasted time. Again, it'd be nice if we're not in this high uncertainty, but it sure feels like we're about to be, not least of which because regardless of what the account is, we know at least one of the two is going to say, it's rigged, absent a decisive win.
And I think one of the two is more likely, let's be honest. But anyway,
yes. Well,
I know. I think one of the two has a track record of doing that more than the other. Let me ask you this. There are multiple paths that could lead one to electoral victory. But it feels like Pennsylvania really is the most important state this time around. What's your take on, what path do they have?
Yeah, it's long been described as the Sun Belt and the Rust Belt. And so when Trump won in 2016 in the Electoral College, it's because he flipped the blue wall states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Biden barely flipped them back, along with Arizona, along with Georgia. We're now fighting in the ever battleground states of Georgia, Arizona, plus now Nevada, which has generally been a Dem state, and North Carolina, which has generally been a Republican state, as your Sun Belt selection. But if Harris surrendered all four of those and is able to hold Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, along with Nebraska too, which looks safe, she'll have 270, which is enough to win because you need 270 to win. So you're right, it brings all of the fight down to can Trump pick up the Sun Belt and one of those, and Pennsylvania. If I went right before our podcast, Matt, and looked at the Real Clear Politics aggregation of all of the most recent polls. So maybe you don't believe in polling, but the aggregation of polling is better than a Ouija board, so you go with it. You know what the aggregation of polling average in Pennsylvania right now is?
It's very tight.
It's even. It can't get closer than that. This is
wow.
And one of the, you probably have had podcast guests. I'm trying to remember all of your guests, but one of the great unknowns is, has the polling in the Rust Belt figured it out? Because they underestimated Trump by 9 points in 2016, and they underestimated Trump by 5 points in 2020. And I was asked this at a CEO event where I was speaking last night, do you think the polls have finally figured it out? And my comment was, unlike media, which is playing to audiences often and therefore has a reason to kind of lean one way or another, I think most pollsters want to be accurate because they're business people. And if their polls are known to be completely unreliable and not accurate, people won't hire them to conduct polls. So they have every incentive to try to figure it out. Have they? I don't know. I'll tell you, talk to me in 6 weeks and I'll tell you if the pollsters found a way to not keep missing Trump voters. But I'm assuming that just it went from 9 to 5. It's going to go from like 5 to 1 would be my best guess of their accuracy in the Rust Belt, which means this thing is tight as a tick.
Wow. Let's go to Senate. There's a lot more Republicans. Oh, I'm sorry. There are a lot more Democratic senators that are playing defense, Democratic seats that are up for re-election. Like Montana seems like it's probably gone. John Tester probably loses. A Republican probably wins that. I think it's very clear that here in West Virginia, Jim Justice will replace Joe Manchin, who retired. So right there, that alone would give you 51 Republicans. Republicans would take the Senate. But there's some interesting, weird stuff going on. Some stuff going on with Deb Fisher in Nebraska. Ted Cruz looks like it's kind of a closer race than you might think. What is your take on the U.S. Senate?
I think you nailed it, Matt. The setup was perfect. The big macro thing that I observe is there just aren't split ticket voters anymore. When you look in the last 2 years when there was the presidential election at the Senate races, so in 2016 and 2020, there was an aggregate 69 Senate races in those 2 years combined. 68 of the 69 times, the voters of a state went Republican, Republican, or Democrat, Democrat. Only Susan Collins in Maine was a Collins, Republican senator, Democratic President Biden in 2020. Otherwise, it always goes in the same direction. So to your point, West Virginia, they're toast without Manchin. So that's 50-50. Montana, testers, guy looks like Montana. He's got his flat top. He's a big guy. He lost a couple of fingers in an industrial accident. The guy's Montana, but to run 15 to 20 points ahead of Kamala Harris against the former Navy SEAL feels hard to pull off in Montana. Sherrod Brown is interesting. He's always been much tougher in Ohio than any other Democrat I can think of in the state of Ohio. So he's got to run 10 points maybe ahead of Harris. He might be able to do it. What will be interesting about that one is a whole lot of cryptocurrency industry money has shown up in the 2024 elections, and they really don't like Sherrod Brown. So I think he's number one on their target list.
Is this just I know he's sort of a populist, banking regulations. Why is crypto so anti-Sherrod Brown?
I think it's because Sherrod Brown's anti-crypto in the minds of the crypto world entrepreneurs. A lot of other senators have shown kind of a greater flexibility for the potential for blockchain-based currencies and innovations to, create new opportunities for businesses or consumers in the financial services space. He is an old school guy. He's an old school politician, and he's definitely an old school consumer protection guy. So he's closer to the kind of the Warren Buffett, Bitcoin is a weapon of mass financial destruction worldview than the worldview of others who see it as a potential base of innovation. But
where's Bruce Mehlman on that question?
I tend to be a techno optimist, so I start excited about the underlying blockchain technology. Any particular cryptocurrency like the so-called Dogecoin seems kind of ridiculous and silly to me, but so do some of the meme stocks, and yet they're things. So I tend to think the underlying technology stuff is real. I am definitely not advising people what to buy or when to buy because I genuinely have no idea. But I think, I'm more likely to want to bet on the future in which blockchain-enabled innovations, including cryptocurrencies, are part of a more robust and frankly hardier financial system. I respect the idea that we need rules of the road so that people don't get fleeced or screwed. But I also, just like I pointed out on the longshoreman, I don't believe the future is let's just block innovation and block automation and we'll be okay. I don't see that as a viable path.
Man, so many different. I want to talk more about business and finance and banking. I want to talk, but since you mentioned the longshoremen, let me ask you this one, right? So, whether they're right or wrong, it strikes me if they go on strike, that could cause prices to go up. That would not be helpful for Kamala Harris right now. We just had this horrific hurricane, which hit Georgia and North Carolina both, and other states too. But those two very important swing states could help or hurt Kamala. I mean, I hate to talk about politics, but that's what we do here. There's just different sort of exogenous things that are happening out there. Any thoughts on how they may impact this race?
I mean, we've been having October surprises since the spring in this crazy election. The extraordinary performance by President Biden in the debate was I mean, I'm sure you also were thinking, to me, it was almost like 9/11 in terms of I am watching real-time history and I could appreciate it real time. Often you realize later, wow, that was, what a historic moment. But just a few minutes into the debate, I remember thinking this is going to be one of those when you're old and you're talking to your grandkids, moments of like, I know where I was when, holy cow. The assassination attempt, where Trump is,
Yeah.
bloodied and defiant, unbelievable, extraordinary October surprise. The switcheroo, you kidding me? I was born in '69. The last time that happened was the year before I was born, '68. And that was earlier in the cycle. That was a crazy October surprise. So, of course, we're going to have the possibility of conflagration in the Middle East. I mean, at any second now,
Yeah.
Israel could retaliate, and that could lead to, stuff getting even crazier than it is. And it's really intense over there right now. You're right about Hurricane Helene, and we've still got a month with a very superheated Gulf of Mexico. So, Superstorm Sandy, you're right. Obviously,
Yeah.
respecting all of the people who are legitimately hurt. But since we're on a political podcast talking about politics, Superstorm Sandy, President Obama looked good and it helped him. Katrina did not help did not help Republicans in the midterms. Former President Bush was seen as not sufficiently engaged. I always thought a little bit unfair, but let's not litigate 2006 here.
You're doing a heck of a job here, Melman.
Brownie, perfect.
Melly.
I don't know. The longshoreman strike, you're right. It would seem like maybe that's a little bit less that prices, maybe there's a risk of a sudden price spike. Certainly both former President Trump and Vice President Harris and President Biden have all landed on the same side, criticizing foreign-owned shipping corporations who oversee some of the ports. So, this is yet one more time, weirdly, they've all seemed to align in the same place. Maybe they'll then say, but it's the administration's fault if this leads to short-term shortages and prices spike. We'll find out. But we've got way too many days to not have a lot more stuff land. I mean, one last thing, you and I assume everything that could possibly ever be discovered about Donald Trump has been discovered. The media is trying to paint the Jack Smith latest stuff as having revelations. At least to my read, it does stuff that's shocking, but nothing new. Stuff that has been in for a while. Is there any oppo on Vice President Harris? She's not really ever been a candidate. I mean, she briefly ran in 2019, but her campaign back then was sufficiently weak that nobody ever needed to drop oppo on them. They just sent a microphone there. So was there oppo? We don't know. They didn't use it if it was in the 2020 presidential because you didn't need to. It was about other things than the vice president. This time she wasn't you didn't worry about it. So I'm assuming that whatever is out, but you just don't know. That could be, again, I don't expect a Kamala Harris access Hollywood tape, but there are things like you saw the form she filled out when the ACLU asked her positions in 2020, with a whole bunch of positions that she has now said, her campaign has said she doesn't believe any of that stuff anymore. But, you may find things that actually require a direct answer and not a campaign's either ignoring or indirect, those are no longer operative positions. So it's hold on to your hat, man.
So you and I both think the presidential election's kind of a jump ball. We both think Dems will lose the Senate. I think narrowly, maybe 51, 50, Republicans will have 51, 52 seats. What about the House? Does it just follow whoever wins the presidency? That party will control the House, or are you looking at something else?
Well, the Dems only needs a net 4, and they've gained control. There are 11 Democrats in harm's way if you look at toss-up or tougher to defend seats per the Bible, the Cook Political Report. And there are 15 Republicans in harm's way, toss-up or worse, including 7 in California and or New York. So that you start with could go either way. The Dems have an insane money advantage, especially at the presidential level, but also in the House. But the history, if you go back 100 years, it's about 13, 14 coattails for the winning party. So if you win the White House, as a rule, you're going to pick up low double-digit House seats. That's more than enough to win. So I'm with you. I think as goes the White House, so goes the House.
Very interesting. Okay. We are covering a lot of ground. So let me go back.
Not slowed down by those confusing Bruce slides that I'm trying to explain.
Well, this would be a short one probably, but man, packed full of information. So you speak a lot about not just not just sort of rank punditry, horse race politics, but you speak to a lot of business groups, associations, things like that, including people who are interested in finance. Let me ask you about this. How do you think this election could impact investment opportunities, the election, and let's game this out. Trump 2.0, how's that different from Trump 1.0? How's Harris 1.0 different than Biden? Big question there. I'm not, an expert in this stuff. That's why I'm asking you.
Well, first, if anybody's going to take my advice for investing, they are a fool with their money who's going to be departed, split from it quickly.
Plastics, right? It's all plastics.
Yeah, right. I am not an expert in what are the smart trades. Although I was actually asked this yesterday at that same event, and my first comment on that is, I have no idea how to play the trading thing other than I would bank on volatility in the short term. Mostly because I don't know who's going to win. If it were me, I might look to, a little bit greater safety in the short term because of the high risk of volatility. In the long term, though, some of the big macro trends are almost election independent. There's going to continue to be an energy transition. It's not happening in the 2020s alone, but whether it's a return to nuclear or the extraordinary innovation that's happening in solar and batteries. It's necessitated by climate change, see Hurricane Helene, among other things. It's accelerated by geopolitics and increasingly enabled by innovation. So that'd be one. I'd bet on AI. I'd bet on the long. Yeah, they're going to try to regulate tech more than they did social media, but it's transformational. It's not quite. It won't live up to the hype in the super short term, but it'll exceed the hype in the medium and the long term. If you're thinking about American demographics, for that matter, demographics in almost all of the large economies of the world, the working age populations are all getting older. It doesn't matter who wins this election. That doesn't change. We may exacerbate the problem if we cut off too much legal immigration. But ultimately, America's getting older and getting sicker. We were getting fatter. We'll see about GLP-1s and what those ultimately do. And geopolitically, we're in an era, whether it's Trump or Harris, of industrial policy, no longer the Milton Friedman, Thomas Friedman, hyper-global world. So those are long-term trends. Whoever wins, you can keep investing on if you have a medium to long-term horizon. On Harris 1.0 and is it a Biden 2.0, there's going to be a lot of continuity. Unlike a Biden, she doesn't have kind of a long body of known work and opinions. The most independent opinions she expressed were the 2020 election platform, and she has walked away from a huge amount of that. So she no longer wants to ban fracking and no longer wants to ban plastic straws and is no longer a Medicare for all. And so, that leads me to presume it would be very much of a Biden 2.0. But I also suggest to me she's not an ideologue. She's much more opportunistic. So she'll, if it's a Dem sweep, which feels super unlikely, then I think she'll push hard where she sees the center of gravity in the Democratic Party, which is certainly left of center. But if it's a Republican Senate, I think my assumption is that she'll aim to play ball and to not be, spitting in the wind, because you can't bully the Senate into giving you what you want when you're the president. You're going to have to work with them. And the last president not to have the Senate on their side when they started was George H.W. Bush in 1989. A Trump 2.0, I mean, it's still the same guy. It's still the same hair. But, remember, he was slow out of the gate. He didn't know how to president. And it's not unique to him. Nobody knows how to be the president when they start, unless your dad was president or, you have a whole lot of holdovers from other administrations. He'll be fast out of the gate. He understands the job. He understands what possibilities are. He has, this won't be year one again. It'll be year 5. So that, the experience is a really big difference. The people will be different. The first time he didn't have a sense of who he should bring in or why they should bring it in. And a lot of people like, Rex Tillerson, Boy Scout, thought he wanted to, the former CEO of Exxon, wanted to serve his country. God bless him for it. But that was not a successful pairing, and he was back on LinkedIn in a couple of weeks. This time it'll be people who are vetted. The administration, Trump knows what he wants. He's going to hire people who will do his bidding. He's not looking for people to kind of, I don't believe, give him credibility for being the president. He's been the president before. And likewise, I don't think people are going to sign up who don't know what they're getting in for. So I think it will be a different sort of team than you saw the first time around. And then, the world was disinflationary. It's not disinflationary anymore. So the tariffs may have a bigger bite. The world was peaceful in 2016, 2017 when he took over. The world is not peaceful right now. When I talk to groups, and I'm happy to go deeper into the, some of the ways in which there'll be similarities policy-wise and some different, but those at the macro level are similarities and differences that I'm watching.
When you talk about industrial policy, what does that mean? What's industrial policy?
Yeah, so after the Cold War, when Francis Fukuyama declared the end of history, we all knew that liberal democracy was the triumphant form of government. And as you saw, big market-oriented reforms in Russia and China and India, it was clear, capitalism and free market capitalism was the right answer. And so Clinton continued a very deregulatory path. And, I think as you saw in the vice presidential debate, both candidates, both Vance and Walz, agree that free trade is not free and that it's not right for America. And whether it's a Trump 2.0 or Harris, they're going to continue what we've seen from Biden. Tons of domestic subsidies. How do we reshore things? How do we get more resilient by bringing semiconductor manufacturing back on shore? We have a CHIPS Act. Russia has a chip. Not Russia. Japan has a CHIPS Act. The EU has a CHIPS Act. Korea has subsidies. China has been subsidizing their own domestic semiconductor industry more than everybody else combined. That leads to gluts. And what you've seen in the response from excess capacity, particularly in China, but also arguably in places like the EU, is suddenly we're putting up tariffs. Biden has put in Build America, Buy America. That's pissed off the European Union, which says, well, then we're going to have buy local preferences. We've seen Trump beginning and the Biden folks accelerating, and Trump and Harris intending to continue accelerating export controls to try to deny American enemies access to technologies that they think are critical. So that will continue whichever one of these guys is in. The free market economics that were Clinton administration, continued by the Bush administration, continued by the Obama administration, and starting to get discontinued in Trump land and even more discontinued in Biden. We're not going back to free market economics. For multinationals, a lot of the clients that I work with, one of the biggest challenges is to recognize that you're not in a Trump, COVID, Putin, Xi fever dream. It's not going back to the, America sets all the rules and everybody follows it. It's a new multipolar geopolitical environment, and no CEO has operated in that kind of multipolar environment before. Businesses have a lot of new things to try to figure out and a lot of things to learn. Particularly given to the point you made earlier, we're in this world where the only trust, the way I put it in my Substack, is all trust is local. People don't trust globalization. They don't trust multinationals. They don't trust national institutions. Only things that they personally know and see. Anything that you see through the national and global media and social media, you don't trust.
As I mentioned earlier, you're doing a lot of travel, speaking to clients, trade associations, organizations, all this, talking to them about these trends as well as what to expect from the presidential race. What are you hearing? What are people asking about? What are they concerned about? What questions keep popping up?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on an audience, with a business audience being more likely to get into the questions around, maybe tariffs, on taxes. Trump has proposed and Vance have proposed an $11 trillion of tax reduction over the next decade. Walz has proposed $5 trillion of tax increase over the next decade, with Trump moving the corporate rate from the current 21 down to 15, he claims, and Walz claiming they're going to take it from the current 21 up to 28. But the smart scorers take a look and say, well, Harris will absolutely offset a lot of her spending plans with new tax increases, but not all of them. And Trump won't come close to offsetting his tax cut proposals with spending decreases. So one common question is, America has a $35 trillion debt today. Under existing policies without change, it goes up to $57 trillion by 2034. Harris would add $2 trillion more over a decade. Trump would add $4 trillion more over a decade, even under dynamic scoring, which is where those numbers come from the Penn-Wharton model. So I get asked a lot about, like, when's that going to become a problem and blow up on us? I often get asked, aren't we a nation of 333 million Americans? Really? These are the two? And why aren't third parties? Why is what makes it so that a third party can't try to occupy some kind of centrist, a moderate compromise lane? A whole lot of questions about both disinformation and about social media, and that what societally can we do to try to get back to an environment where there is trust once again, where we can compromise without being, thrown to the social media wolves as some kind of quisling, because we thought the founders designed a system that requires compromise, which of course they did. So,
do you have an answer to that one?
The system. What's that?
Do you have an answer to how we get back to trust?
Yeah, my macro theory, and you've heard me on this, Matt, and you've had me on for so many years, but I go back to whether it's the Gilded Age or the 70s. We're in an era of reform, and they're always messy, and they always occur parallel with what David Brooks described as America having a moral convulsion every 80 years. I think people trust the system when, with their own eyes and their lived experience, they see a system where the policies and the parties and the institutions that govern our lives weren't created in the last century for the challenges of the last century, but they're modernized, where they create more opportunities for everybody, where it doesn't feel like you have kind of an elite establishment that's only dealing itself in, and that their trade policies and that their banking policies and that their other, and that their other regulatory policies don't seem to just keep advantaging the people who already have the advantages with a narrowing winner's circle. I think populism is a recurring bug that happens in democracies when the operating systems aren't updated in a way that people can see and feel in their lives, make it work for them. So I just think we're in a reform era. I think we will get back to that broader trust again, but I think it may take us 5 to 10 years.
Well, final thoughts. What did I miss? What should I have asked? What did I get wrong? What do you want to leave us with?
Well, man, we've ranged across a crazy amount of topics. As you have noted and been kind enough from time to time to point to, my quarterly slides, which were magnum opus, have been not displaced, but I thought and hope complemented by a weekly Substack, which is free. So the good news is, if anybody here likes a look at, hopefully interesting visual look at policy and politics, you can sign up for my Substack. And if you hate it, you can quit it and you get your money back because it's free. That's been really fun to do. It's created that much more of a time crunch. I still want to keep doing the kind of the big quarterly analyses, but I failed in Q3 to put that 9-week slog out. It's in process, but already it's Thursday afternoon and I'm thinking, like, what am I going to do this Sunday? My plan, by the way, this Sunday is, over the course of looking at the elections, looking at what comes next, thinking about these things, and I know you run across interesting data facts and sometimes kind of weird, what I view as trivia. So my current plan for this Sunday is trivia time, looking at some questions like, what is the average coattails for a winning president over the last 100 years? Or who was
13 seats, I was told.
You were told, although 13 didn't include 1928. So I've got to weigh that. I had that since 1932, but I ought to go back for the last 100 years. So I'm going to throw in 1928, but I don't think it's going to move the numbers too much. Another one is, I mentioned the last time a president got elected without the Senate held by their own party, you got to go back to 1989. But how about the last time a Democrat because that was Republican, George H.W. Bush, the last Democrat to win the White House for the first time without the Democrats also winning the Senate. That one will be question number one this Sunday, my friend.
Good stuff. I love it. I love having weekly Bruce Mehlman. And I have to say, my wife just launched a Substack recently. It's called The Poisoning, and it's about fentanyl poisoning. And
yeah, I saw the piece you wrote on that. That's pretty powerful stuff.
it's really good. I'm pretty proud of her, and she's had some amazing interviews with really cool frontline workers, former addicts, Rolling Stone writers, authors. It's super cool. But she said, I want to put it out every Sunday because that's what Bruce Mehlman does.
Huh.
And that's her only reason. My question to you is Sunday a good day, or did you just randomly pick this?
I randomly picked it. It's 6 charts because 6 is alliterative with Sunday. I don't know what I would have done if it was Monday. Some of it is like you. I get so much stuff that I want to read. I love how Substack has now, like, it's a golden age for me of access to smart people who write great stuff. I am intentional about making sure I have a really balanced media diet. So I want people on the right and on the left. And I want people in tech and finance as well as politics. I don't want to be, somebody who's read all of the same stuff as everybody else saying the same thing on all the calls.
Yeah, boring. Well, then you don't have no value
creates
add.
2 problems. One, I am crushed 5 days a week. And on Saturday, I am able to start digging out. And on Sunday, I finally kind of get to the stuff that I found fun. So assuming that my readership is not totally dissimilar, Sunday's a merciful day. I try to create something that's a 2-minute read, maybe 3 when I have a lot to say, but not more than 5 ever. And I often don't get the bandwidth to create the stuff till Friday night and Saturday. So the only thing, hopefully, your wife doesn't find, but I have found that rather than saving myself time because I am distributing it on a much more efficient platform than BCCing 8,000 people, which was the way I would send out the slide decks, that was not efficient.
Yeah.
Arguably, it was also spam. Substack is super efficient, but I got all this, pressure on myself. I want to have something awesome every Sunday.
Totally.
And that means that every now and then on Saturday, it's like I just spent 4 hours on the stupid Substack that I was switching to make my life easier. It's like Bridge on the River Kwai. What have I done?
I feel your pain, Bruce. I think it was the aforementioned David Brooks who said that being a columnist is like having a term paper due tomorrow for the rest of your life. And this is the life we have chosen, my friend. But it's a great product. It enriches, certainly gives me a lot of insight. So everybody check it out. The Substack is Bruce Mehlman's Age of Disruption. Bruce Mehlman, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming back.
Great to see you, Matt. Thanks for having me, as always.